It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This spooky month, I'm looking at movies with familiar monsters, but maybe done in unfamiliar ways. This week, I turned my eyes toward Dracula. Sort of. You see, this movie, 1988's Dracula's Widow, is less about the Prince of Darkness and more about the widow he left behind when he died in 1893. This was a movie I remember seeing the box for at the video store, I think, but I never really thought to rent it or anything like that. But that said, my adult self knows that it's kind of a damn shame, for Dracula's widow is played by Sylvia Kristel. Now, Kristel was born in the Netherlands, and she was this really pretty girl, and throughout the early part of the 70s, she consistently began auditioning for large roles for the better part of the next 15 years or so. These roles would be for movies like Last Tango in Paris, or Polanski's The Tenant, or Louis Malle's Pretty Baby, or she even auditioned to be Lois Lane in the first Superman movie. She also auditioned for 4 consecutive Bond films: The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, and Octopussy. And she was actually up for a part in Once Upon a Time in the West, but she didn't get any of those parts. But she would be famous for something else, and what would ultimately become her most lasting contribution were in erotic roles. In 1974, she got the lead role in Emmanuelle, about a woman who takes trips to explore her sexuality and sensuality. Following that success, not only did she do more Emmanuelle films, but she ended up appearing in more erotic films like 1981's Lady Chatterley's Lover and the sex comedy Private Lessons. Then later in 1985, she was in Mata Hari, which required her to bear all quite often. Interestingly, she actually had roles offered to her that she turned down, like for movies like Logan's Run, Body Heat, Blade Runner, Scarface, Dune, and Blue Velvet. Any one of those would have ended up probably making her a lot better known than just being Emmanuelle. Certainly movies like Blade Runner or Dune, or Scarface for that matter, would have given her some sort of a cult status as an actress. But I do suppose the role of playing a kind of sexy vampire does ultimately agree with her. Interestingly enough, she does not have a nude scene in this movie. Of all the things that she's known for, that does not happen in this movie. And which is kind of interesting because the quote unquote good girl in the movie, the girlfriend character to one of the victims, actually does have a nude scene in a bathtub. You don't normally see that juxtaposition of the bad girl not having the nude scene and the good girl having the nude scene if you're going to have a movie that has a nude scene. Anyway, I digress. What's more is this movie was the directorial debut of Christopher Coppola. Now, you might recognize that last name, but I assure you there's no relation. Nah, I'm just messing with you. He is indeed one of the many Coppolas in Hollywood. In fact, he is the son of August Coppola, who was the brother of Francis Ford Coppola and Talia Shire. He is cousins with Sofia Coppola and Jason Schwartzman. But perhaps the most important factoid is that his brother is none other than Nicolas Cage. Just a year later, Nick would appear in Vampire's Kiss. So the brothers had a lot of vampire action going on in the late 80s. Christopher is not on the same level as Uncle Francis or cousin Sophia or brother Nick in terms of popularity or a lot of quality filmography listings, but he did end up with a fairly key job. In 2013, he was teaching at the San Francisco Art Institute, which is one of his alma maters, but he also got appointed by California Governor at that time, Jerry Brown, to serve on the Arts Council. That was something that Francis also had served on the board of as well. Okay, so maybe Christopher's filmography isn't quite up to snuff with, say, Ghost Rider or Jack, but his first movie does have a fairly sexy leading lady, so let's talk about Dracula's Widow. This tale takes place in Hollywood. The first half of the credits shows various neon signs for various places that very much makes this a film squarely happening in the late 80s. It's in a way, it's kind of even presented as a neon hell of sorts. The second half of the credits features our narrator, a cop by the name of Lieutenant Lannon. And he's kind of doing his very best gritty film noir voiceover. He says that he's seen a lot of things, but this particular story starts at a spooky wax museum that is about to put on a supposedly authentic Dracula exhibit featuring lots of stuff that was, again, supposedly owned by the Count himself. This isn't so much the idea of the Bela Lugosi as Dracula, quite as much as it's legitimately supposed to be like stuff from Vlad the Impaler. Well, the guy running this place, Raymond Everett, when he was checking everything in, expected 5 crates, but he actually gets 6 crates delivered from Romania. That 6th crate, well, that contained Vanessa, who is our titular Dracula's widow, and she snuck out of her crate and went for a walk and ended up at the jazz bar called the Blue Angel, where she meets a guy who immediately, the moment she walks in, tries hitting on her. And she suggests that maybe they leave the bar where they can go, I guess, to the side of the road, where she allows him to kind of take her behind a bush, grope her, and make out with her before she bares her fangs and goes in for a bite. Now, back at the Wax Museum, 2 burglars break in to rob the place. One of the burglars is attacked by a kind of a strange monster hand with webbed fingers and sharp claws that rip his face open, with his throat and guts soon to be ripped out by the monster too. The other burglar was able to escape after finding the ghastly scene of his buddy in pieces on the floor. And Vanessa makes her way to Raymond's apartment that's upstairs from the museum. And she takes control of Raymond and basically kind of commands him to separate himself from his girlfriend, Jenny. Now, Vanessa really was the Count's wife. However, upon learning that he was indeed destroyed, she doesn't handle that news very well at all. She becomes rather bloodthirsty, pardon the pun. But Raymond is not too excited himself to find out that 1, he has a bite on his neck that looks like a vampire bite. 2, he finds blood in his apartment that belongs to 3, the disemboweled robber who was in the museum storage room, and 4, that he has a vampire in one of his crates in his storage room. He tries to destroy Vanessa, believing, that if he stakes her, everybody's free and clear of everything, but he cannot, as she does have control over him. He begins driving her around whenever she psychically calls out to him, and she even wants him to kiss her and make out with her, which gets noticed by Jenny, who just so happened to be with friends in a portion of town near where Raymond and Vanessa were in his car stopped at a red light. It's during this time that Vanessa also learns that Van Helsing was most likely responsible for putting her husband in the ground. Permanently put him into the ground, that is. Well, while driving around, Vanessa and Raymond happen upon a place that has a pentagram spray painted on the outside wall. So she definitely is interested in that. She wants to go investigate that business. And they find an honest-to-God devil cult that is about to have a bloodletting ceremony. And while this is going on, Vanessa transforms into her monster form and basically kills all of the cult members within, a couple of minutes. She begins tearing through them and dismembering them. I have no idea why the scene is in this movie other than it's the 80s and in LA. So of course there's probably some devil shit going on and to, I guess, show how powerful she is, but it's kind of a fun scene. It's not what you expected from the rest of the movie to actually have this kind of literal sacrifice going on, but I digress. Now, the two sides of this movie, the hard-boiled detective side that plays more like a film noir, and the monster vampire side that is a little gothic in its tone, come into contact with one another by way of two things. The guy that Vanessa picked up when she woke up and the surviving burglar coming to the cops to kind of explain the state of his buddy's remains that happened on that same night. Now, between the guy that she picked up and what the burglar says, Lannon starts to put two and two together that we have enough similarities that we might have a serial killer going on, and the only thing he knows to do is to follow up on the lead that there was a dead guy at the wax museum. So Lannon goes to talk to Raymond, and while they are mostly friendly towards one another, Raymond quickly and adamantly denies that there was any kind of murder or dismemberment at the wax museum. But before he can go into any further questioning, Lannon's called to the Satanist Club to clean up the mess that Vanessa left there. A kind of kooky old man who happens to be named Helsing is quite interested in what's going on. And he tells Lannon that he is the grandson of the famed Van Helsing who killed Dracula in London in 1893. And when Lannon shows Van Helsing the bodies of the recently murdered and mutilated, he goes around and stakes them all. Lannon thinks the old guy is weird, but when he sees the staked bodies open their eyes and react to the staking, he starts to believe that maybe there is something more supernatural happening with these murders. Lannon interviews Jenny, whose last name happens to be Harker. He asks her if she noticed any change in Raymond recently. He's not exactly sure what he's looking for, only that something spooky is going on. So he's not really even sure what questions to ask. But speaking of Raymond and spooky, Raymond is beginning to kill and drink the blood from small animals. And after learning that he recently saw Jenny, Vanessa threatens her, and even seemingly gives Raymond a vision of her stabbing Jenny to death. When Raymond rushes to Jenny's house to find that she is still alive and wearing a cross for protection, he's relieved. And later, Vanessa goes to Helsing's antique shop to get revenge for his ancestor killing her husband. She is initially repelled by a crucifix that Van Helsing is carrying, but when he falls from a broken floorboard, he drops the cross, which allows for her to kill him. Lannon's partner also dies by Vanessa's hand too, because he was going to go and speak to Helsing and ran into her while she was still there. Now, Lannon, finding his body, stakes him and then later stakes Helsing, who's already turned into a vampire when he found him. But he also happens upon Vanessa, who is still in the area, and he chases her up a fire escape, but she then is able to get away by turning into a vampire and flying off into the night. Now, with bodies piling up and now including associates of Lannon's, Raymond is arrested and the Wax Museum is raided for evidence, but they're having a hard time finding anything. Raymond is questioned, but he keeps talking about a woman who's a vampire, so they decide, let's bring him downtown, make things a little bit more real, and try to get a more believable confession from him. Lannon visits Raymond in jail to learn more about the vampire that's roaming the streets. So, along with Jenny, Lannon searches for Vanessa's coffin, not realizing that the night before she moved her coffin. And knowing that Raymond expects her to come for him to kill him for potentially betraying her, the pair decide that they should probably follow up and go back to the jail to wait for her to arrive there. But what they don't realize is that Raymond has been removed from the jail by a couple of paramedics who are trying to get an accurate confession from him to sell to the press. Vanessa swoops in as this giant bat and kills them both. And Jenny and Lannon arrive to help. And Lannon throws a stake to Raymond so that he can destroy Vanessa. And as she melts into a bloody pile of goo, Raymond is cured of his vampirism and is also no longer bound to her as a servant. The best news is that there's a whole bunch of actual obvious supernatural evidence visible to a whole bunch of other cops on the scene that helps exonerate Raymond and also gives Lannon credit for what he had been chasing after this whole time. But now it's time for me to choose 3 things I like about Dracula's widow. First, while it is used in a little bit of a hit and miss fashion, I really do like some of the background choices made in the moments of horror or that are applied to certain characters. Coppola washes the set or the frame or a wall behind the character with a color that is reminiscent of what Creepshow did to mimic shock moments seen in old horror comic books back in the 50s. The first time we see it is when Vanessa first confronts Raymond. An orange circle is placed behind Raymond instead of the normal backdrop of his apartment wall or his window or whatever. And when we see Vanessa, she's bathed in bright red tinting. But also at other times, whenever she's walking by windows later in the movie, while outside the windows, everything looks fine, but inside the windows, it's all this bright red. Jenny has a moment where she sleepwalks and is, sensing that something is going on with Raymond. And she's bathed in blue in that scene. So there's a lot of use to colors. And I do, appreciate that there's an attempt, to make it, to not make this a generic looking movie, to actually try to put some concepts and ideas, whether they really work or not. Your mileage may vary. But next, there is a level of camp in the performances that I also definitely appreciate. Joseph Sommer plays Lannon, and he's really leaning in to the whole old-timey detective type way of speaking or the way of acting and so forth. Stefan Schnabel plays Helsing, and he's absolutely bonkers in this. The scene in which he tells Lannon about being a descendant of the famous Helsing, and then his gleeful staking of all of Vanessa's victims, it comes off playing comedically. Sylvia Kristel is also kind of over the top, but she's kind of playing the role of this vampire beauty like maybe it would have been played back in the 30s or maybe the 40s. She makes wild commands and does a lot of gesturing with her hands. It's a very hammy performance that actually works because the movie does kind of feel like it's trying to harken back to movies that would have been made in the 30s or 40s with these kind of grandiose over-the-top performances. Now, Rachel Jones, who plays Jenny, is also kind of a throwback of this kind of chaste and overly good girl. She also comes across like the potential victim or target of a vampire in an older movie, though she's actually never truly the target of Vanessa. Everything's kind of role reversed because we have a female vampire, so the target is a man as opposed to a male vampire going after a woman. But the one guy who seems to actually be playing his role in the modern way is Lenny Von Dolan as Raymond. He looks like he should be performing some new wave pop song from the 80s, but he's actually playing this fairly straightforward as a tortured soul, somewhere in between a kind of a Jonathan Harker type of character and a Renfield type of character, but without Renfield's craziness. Lastly, this is one of those almost perfect cable movies that I probably could have or should have caught on any night back in the 90s, at least in the early 90s in particular. I feel like that if I had watched this movie back when I was in high school on some weekend night, I would have probably really liked it. There's this kind of lovely and likable quality to the movie. It's something, it has something of an attitude that does seem to pull from both old noir detective thrillers from Lannon and his partner. But then with Raymond, there's, he's like a big fan of the old classic monsters. So it kind of plays like an old, almost gothic at times horror movie. We see him watching Nosferatu when Vanessa first wakes up and attacks him. He's got a poster of the creature from the Black Lagoon. He also has a poster of Dracula and at least one artistic art print of Nosferatu hanging in his office. His wax museum has a Bela Lugosi style Dracula statue, but there's even a Nosferatu reference that Jenny can kind of sense Vanessa attacking Raymond in a couple of scenes. It's just a nice little mix of genres that I would have really been attracted to when I was a teenager. And it's also incredibly watchable. And if I caught it, I very likely would have wanted to set a recording for the next time it was on so that I could check it out again. It reminds me a lot of very similar movies that aired a lot on HBO or Showtime in the early 90s when I probably would have been tuning in on weekends before I had a license and a car to go out with my friends. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and the Monster Mondays podcast at your favorite providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we go to the summer of 1994 for a thriller featuring a trio of A-list names and a whole lot of fur and doggy toys. Yep, it's Jack Nicholson, Michelle Pfeiffer, and James Spader in Mike Nichols' Wolf. Until next week, stay spooky.